In 1945, an Egyptian farmer cracked open a sealed clay jar and found 13 leather-bound books the church had been hunting for over 1,000 years. Inside were gospels that rewrite the story of early Christianity, texts that name the God of the Bible as a blind, arrogant imposter and claim you carry a divine spark he is desperate to keep hidden. These are the Nag Hammadi texts, and after tonight you will understand exactly why the church called them heresy, burned every copy it could find, and nearly won. To understand what was buried, you have to go back to the 2nd and 3rd centuries, when Christianity was not one thing, it was a storm of competing visions, and the Gnostics were the most radical faction of all. The Gnostics believed that the physical world was not created by the supreme loving God, it was created by a lesser inferior being they called the Demiurge, who was blind to the true divine light above him. This Demiurge in some Gnostic texts explicitly identified with the God of Genesis, thought he was the only God, and his first declaration, according to these Gospels, was a lie. I am a jealous God, and there is no other. But above the Demiurge, the Gnostics taught exists a true and perfect divine source called the pleroma, the fullness, and you, the human being, carry a fragment of that real divine light inside your body like a prisoner inside a cage. This was the core Gnostic revelation, that salvation is not about obedience to a church or a god, but about gnosis, direct personal knowledge of your own divine origin, which no institution can give you and no institution can take away. You can see immediately why Rome found this terrifying. If every believer could access the divine directly, the priest, the bishop, the pope, none of them were necessary. In 367 CE, the powerful Bishop Athanasius of Alexandria issued a decree. These texts were forbidden. Every monastery in Egypt was ordered to destroy their copies and burn what could not be saved. But at one monastery near the cliffs of Jabal al-Tarif, a monk or a group of monks did something extraordinary. Instead of burning the texts, they sealed them in a red earthenware jar and buried them in the hillside. They pressed the lid shut, they covered it with earth, and then they disappeared, and the jar sat undisturbed in the dark for exactly 1,600 years. December 1945. A farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman was digging for sabak, natural fertilizer, with his brothers at the base of those same cliffs when his mattock hit something hard. He almost did not open it. Local superstition said sealed jars might contain jinn, but greed won. He smashed the top open with his mattock, and a shower of golden papyrus fragments flew up into the desert air. Inside were 13 leather-bound codices, actual books, not scrolls, containing 52 texts written in Coptic, translated from even older Greek originals that scholars believe date to the 1st and 2nd centuries. Among them, the Gospel of Thomas, which contains 114 sayings attributed directly to Jesus, many with no parallel anywhere in the Bible, including the line, "The kingdom of God is inside you and outside you." There was the Gospel of Philip, which describes Mary Magdalene as the disciple Jesus loved above all others, whom he would often kiss, a claim that detonated like a grenade when scholars began publishing it in the 1970s. The secret book of John laid out an entire alternative cosmology, a creation story where the true God never intended for humanity to be trapped in flesh, and the snake in the Garden of Eden was actually the hero, offering humanity the chance to wake up. These texts did not survive by luck. The journey from that desert jar to a published translation took 30 years of scholarly warfare, Cold War smuggling, international legal battles, and one genuinely bizarre murder. Muhammad Ali's family was actually mid-blood feud when the jar was found. His father had been killed months earlier, and almost immediately after the discovery, he and his brothers took revenge on their enemy, reportedly hacking the man apart and eating his heart. The texts scattered immediately. Some sold on the black market, one codex smuggled to New York, another sitting in a Cairo antiquities office for decades, while scholars who tried to access them were blocked by politics, ego, and outright sabotage. It was not until 1977 that a complete English translation was finally published, 32 years after a farmer cracked open a jar and changed the history of religion forever. What scholars found confirmed the worst nightmare of Orthodox Christianity. Early faith was not a single unified tradition handed down intact from Jesus. It was a war of ideas, and the losers were simply erased. The Gnostic Gospel suggests that the Jesus of these texts was not offering submission to an external God. He was offering a mirror, pointing inward, telling his closest followers that the divine was something they already were. Today, the Nag Hammadi codices are housed in the Coptic Museum in Cairo, available to scholars, translated into dozens of languages, and quietly reshaping how theologians, historians, and ordinary people understand the origins of what they were told to believe. The monk who buried that jar never knew his act of preservation would outlast every empire, every decree, and every bishop who tried to silence him, and the question he preserved is still alive. What if the truth was never outside you at all? A monk buried 13 books in the dark and trusted that the truth inside them would survive, and 16 centuries later it did. Subscribe to History Trolled for the ancient stories that someone somewhere desperately needed you never to hear.